Since the launch of TBC Classic, we of course have leveled the druid all the way up to level 70, got full pre-base gear, and took her into our first ever TBC raid. But now that the main character is sorted out, it's time to start working on another character. Because this time around, TBC is very alt friendly. We don't need to do every attunement all over again just to run some heroics. Plus, a single elixir isn't 30 gold, so this time I really want to have an actual alt character to play. And originally, I wanted to alt a warrior, but there's already a million of those running around. So instead, I have decided to return to my hunter. So logging on to the hunter for the first time in literally months, everything was just an absolute mess. Talents were reset and bags and bank were full of complete garbage. So I took a couple of minutes just to set up the new talents and of course visit the class trainer. But immediately, I noticed that we have a very big problem, and that's the mount. Whilst Harold has served us well, there was just no way that I was going to run around Outland on a 60% mount. And lucky for me, I had been farming quite a lot of gold recently, so using that, I decided to purchase myself an epic mount. Because since the pre-patch, they're only around 600 gold. Now granted, that is still quite a lot, but it's much better than the 1000 gold or whatever it was in vanilla. But with that now out of the way, I think we are ready to take our first steps on Outland. Okay, so I may have forgotten to record it, but I made it through the dark portal, and look who is here, the man himself, Gerald. So I made my way down the steps and accepted the first quest that Outland has to offer, which basically just takes us over to Honor Hold. And once arrived, I went through all the usual procedures, turned in the quest, set my Hearthstone, and grabbed every single quest imaginable. And almost immediately though, I realised something was very wrong. None of Gerald's abilities seemed to be on his bar. And looking back on it, there was probably some kind of way for me to resolve this issue, but no. I decided to make it as difficult as possible, and I went all the way back over to Stormwind and reset Gerald's talents. Now granted, it did solve my issue, but surely there was something far easier that I could have done, right? But by the time I had actually made it back to Hellfire Peninsula, it was already like 2 AM and I just decided to log out. But logging back on a few days later, finally everything was in place. We could finally get started on some actual questing. And first up was some simple fell orc killing. Now obviously on the druid we stuck to pretty much all dungeon leveling. And sure, it was fun, I definitely enjoyed it, but this time I wanted to do things differently. I wanted to actually do the quests and explore the zones fully. And sure, Hellfire Peninsula might not be the most aesthetically pleasing place to look at, but I was still so excited to just chill out and do some questing. And the first few quests in this zone were really about as plain as it gets. I went up north a bit to this tiny ravine looking thing to kill a dreadcaller, imps, and some burning fell elementals. It's exactly what I expected when I came to this zone, and I'm kinda glad that the first few quests were so easygoing, because I honestly had zero clue how to play Hunter. See, I thought that aimed shot was like your biggest ability that you always kept on cooldown. However, after doing some research, I now know that the only reason we really have aimed shot is for misdirection pools, but this time was also a fantastic opportunity to start leveling up my melee skills, because I know just how important melee weaving is. I had no idea how it worked, I just knew that it exists. After the little demon murder quest, I returned to Honor Hold and turned in the quests. And one thing that was absolutely amazing was the quest rewards. Now granted, our gear wasn't currently terrible, it's just not great. But all of these early quests were rewarding us with gear that really helped us get up to speed, such as this two-handed axe, which even now I am still using. So I moved down to the southeast a bit where I found Expedition Point, who offered me more quests with even more gear upgrades. Now this was a small string of quests that were taking place inside of Zeth Gore. It's like a small fell orc compound thing, and we were simply just burning down a couple of their their towers, and of course I again took the time to start leveling up my two-handed axe skills. But after that was done, I returned to Expedition Point and handed the quests in. I managed to claim our first blue piece of gear, and they then of course sent us straight back into Zethgor, this time to kill fell orcs and loot 12 cursed talismans. Now as far as it goes, everything so far had gone rather quick, no issues with the quests or whatever, but this was the first wall that I hit. This quest took forever to complete. The talismans that we were supposed to be looting just didn't want to drop, plus the area was super contested. I genuinely almost gave up, but after literally 45 minutes I was able to get it done. All that time for a measly 9.5k XP. Was it worth it? Probably not. I then jumped behind Expedition Point, where we were supposed to be disrupting the demonic portals that were spawning demons. What we had to do was kill the nearby demons until they dropped us 4 demonic runestones, which we then used to close the portals, and boom, quest completed. The follow-up quest was a bit of a weird one. We had to speak to the Griffin Master at Expedition Point that then sent us on a bird above the Legion assault, and we had to drop bombs on top of their heavy machinery. And the only reason that I say it's weird is because it felt a lot like a retail quest. But regardless, it was still nice to see Hellfire from above, and it was a nice break from murdering. Plus 13 XP for a 2.5 minute long quest, no complaints really. But that then sent us on another bird to a small broken up island called Shatter Point. And again, they sent us on another automatic bird to drop bombs on top of demons. The devs clearly thought that they had made some massive breakthrough in quest design at this point. But again, it was quick and simple, but a nice big XP reward at the end. But after the bird had dropped us off, we were back on our feet and leveling our axe skills. This time against these gremlin looking things. Actually, now that I'm looking at them, I think these are some sort of broken Draenei, but correct me if I'm wrong. After that was done, I moved up to the very north part of the zone to close a burning Legion gate, which required us to kill Warbinger Arix Amal first to obtain the key. Now, as much as I was having fun, there was one thing that I noticed about Hellfire Peninsula. Everything looks exactly the same. Now don't get me wrong, I think this is a really cool place. The demons are definitely some of the coolest looking mobs in the game. Plus I think this is a great introductory zone to TBC. It really does set the mood for what TBC is all about. But you know, would it really kill them to give it a bit of diversity? So after clearing all of the quests in the surrounding area, I made my return to Honor Hold. And unfortunately, I was out of time on this day. And I knew that it was going to be a few days until I played again, so I made sure I was comfortably sat inside of the inn and logged out. So after like a week of doing stuff on the druid, I was back and ready to grind on the hunter again. And the first quests that I decided to tackle were all right beneath Honor Hold inside of this little cave. Now the reason that I took such a long break was actually for a few different reasons. Firstly, rested XP of course, but also because I was thinking a lot about my professions, and in vanilla I was on engineering plus alchemy for transmutes. However now, I have actually decided to pick up mining, because currently the price of ores is ridiculously high, and I thought it would be a fantastic way to make some passive gold on the side. Now I don't know if any of you have tried leveling mining recently, but let me tell you now, it's an absolute nightmare. Doing it through smelting is incredibly expensive, but for some reason, there was just 0 mining nodes in vanilla zones. For the thorium ore, I was getting like 3 levels per hour. I had to resort to clearing Dire Maul East for the mining nodes at the end. It was just taking that long. But getting back on topic, I killed off the 12 little gremlin things and handed the quest in, which then sent us straight back into the depths of that cave to kill a mini-boss. And there was a couple of nearby players, clearly waiting for the same mob. So of course, I invited them to join me, and we could all get the quest completion. However, the rogue decided to decline the invitation and then steal the mob tag. Kind of a dick move if you ask me, but it's okay. Because as we were leaving, myself and the hunter stood and watched as that same rogue died to a couple of random mobs. Felt fantastic to see him getting what he deserved. On the topic of people dying though, I was peacefully killing my sandworms when a warlock decided to start attacking me whilst I had a mob on me and low HP. You know, typical horde stuff. Not gonna lie though, I don't have a clue how Hunter works in PvP. The most I know about it is using Freezing Trap and kiting warriors, but I respawned myself and quickly finished up the worm quest and made my way over to a place called the Gorgaz Outpost for another very strange quest. What we had to do was plant this stone artifact on the ground and then drag these Shattered Hand berserkers towards them and kill them. And when we did, they would become a spirit that we then had to kill for the quest. There was luckily a nearby warrior that I teamed up with, and we were able to do it quite easily. I then went to the very southern part of the zone, this time to kill void elementals so that we could take their void walker essence. Now doing this quest was a little bit terrifying because there was a lot of max level players running around here, and that's probably because I think these guys can drop Motive Shadow, which can be sold for quite a lot on the auction house. So I had to kind of make sure I didn't piss any of these guys off and had to stick to just killing the elementals on the outskirts. And since it was right next to the void walkers, I decided to stop off and do this simple quest of killing some spirits, as well as this undead warlock who thought it would be a fantastic idea to attack me and the druid I was teamed up with. The quest was nice and simple though, just your standard WoW classic murder everything quest. And again, since it was right here, I decided to tackle the Ravager Eggs quest. Now, funny thing about the Ravagers, these guys are actually the best in slot pet for us, apparently by quite a large amount too. And we've had Gerald for quite a long time, since like, what, level 15 or something like that? And I have grown very attached to him. So, will I switch over to using a Ravager? Well, we'll talk about that in the next video. So I made my way back over to the Chef Legacy to hand a quest in, and doing that got us to level 61, so only 9 left to go. And since he is a chef, Legacy wanted us to collect some hellboar meat and purify it so that he can turn it into bacon. Doesn't seem very appetizing if you ask me, but I'm not going to judge. I also find it quite funny that even on a different planet entirely, we have gone back to simply killing some boars, just with extra layers. Legacy then of course wanted us to collect him some buzzard wings. Whatever this man is cooking, keep it away from me. The quest did end up giving us a recipe though, and little known fact, cooking is my favourite profession in the game. It's not profitable, like at all, but there's something so cozy about setting up a campfire in the middle of Nagrand and cooking some sandworm meat. But with all of that stuff now done, it was time for us to again return to Honor Hold and hand the quests in. And among the follow-up quests, we were given a very important quest, because the reward was the Blade Fist Breadth, a trinket that would give 26 crit rating, but also an on-use that increases our attack power by 200 for 15 seconds. This trinket is so unbelievably good that I still see some max level players running around with this thing. Now at the time, I actually didn't realise that I had picked this quest up, otherwise I probably would have just beelined it towards the objective. But instead, I went up north to visit 4-man Razzle Kraz, pretty good name as far as it goes, who had us sifting through actual hellboar shit. I can only imagine the faces of the devs when this idea came up. He then wanted us to go into this cave that is literally right next to him to kill the mini-boss Urgaz, where this rogue stood and watched as I was being murdered and then proceeded to steal my mob. It's not all rogues, but it's always a rogue. I then went down to this stream of oozing fell slime, where all we had to do was kill a few of these terror fiends. This quest was a bit of a pain in the ass though, because I kept pulling all of these slimes which were pretty hard to kill. But at the very end of this stream was the elite quest that we needed for that very powerful trinket. And a couple of players were trying to take him down, so I tried shouting "Inv," but got no response. And after those two players wiped and seemingly never came back for another attempt, I listed myself on the LFG tool and tried putting together my own group. I did also try to solo the boss. That went about as well as you could probably imagine, but after only a couple minutes, I had managed to find a couple of players to do it with. And it was a little bit tough, since we didn't actually have a tank. But thanks to the mage who was constantly blinking around and kiting the boss everywhere, in the end, we were able to get Arazius down. So excitedly, I rushed my way back over to Honor Hold, where I stocked up on water and food for Gerald and handed my big chunk of quests in. And just like that, we had acquired the Blade Fist's breadth. So with our first seriously good upgrade in hand, I obviously wanted to test it out. And what better place to do that than inside of the dungeon Hellfire Ramparts. Now as far as this dungeon goes, this was honestly one of my favourites. I think it is a fantastic first TBC dungeon. Now of course my intentions in here were to simply test out my new trinket, but there is actually quite a few really good pieces of gear that we could potentially see drop. Firstly, the scale leggings of the skirmisher, which would give us 22 agility and 32 attack power. Plus it has 3 gem slots. These are so good that honestly, very likely that they would last us until level 70 if we did manage to get them. Secondly, the blood-stained Ravager gauntlets and the Garrote string necklace. The neck really isn't as big, but the gauntlets again are so insane that they would probably last until level 70. So first boss on the list is Watchkeeper Zangarmarsh. Now even with our shiny new trinkets, my DPS really wasn't that good. Again, I'm going to blame the fact that I didn't really understand the proper hunter rotation yet. That's something that I learned about towards the end of the video. So we get him down, and sadly we didn't end up seeing the legs drop. But no worries, because we made quick work of the following trash packs and we're soon standing in front of the second boss, Omor the Unscarred. Definitely one of the best NPC models in the game. But this boss is the guy that can drop both our gloves and our neck piece. And surprisingly, the gloves do actually drop. And I actually ended up passing on them. And that is because I realized that the quest we had for this dungeon would offer a pair of gloves that gives slightly less agility but more attack power. And overall, I just decided that the quest ones were more viable. So on to the final boss now is Vazrudin. Now we actually ended up wiping here because these classic players did what classic players do best and stood directly inside of the fire that the boss spawns. Stand in the fire, DPS higher. Yes, I couldn't agree more. But everyone rezzed up and made their way back over to the boss. And unfortunately, we ended up wiping yet again. And the rogue was one angry little dwarf, because he then decided to rage quit on us. And with only 4 people, unfortunately, it just wasn't going to be possible. So of course, that meant that we weren't able to get the quest that we had done, which meant that we didn't manage to get our gloves, which was the perfect excuse to go straight back in again. Now if we were successful this time, and managed to get the quest done, then we would really need to replace the legs ASAP. And that is because currently, I was using the Devil Source set from Vanilla, and together, they are fantastic. But individually, they are horrendous. And no offense to the last group, but the group this time were significantly better than the last. We were just tearing our way through everything, including the first boss Zangarmarsh, who, unsurprisingly, dropped the same plate chest piece twice in a row. Typical. But no worries, since we still had the other bosses to look forward to. And no surprise to anyone, but the loot this time was the Crystal Fire Staff. On to Vazrudin now. Things started off pretty damn rough, with again, people standing literally in the middle of the fire pools. You know, I could already see what was going to happen. And we managed to get Nazan down to 2.5k HP, but in the end, it just simply was not enough. But of course, we all rezzed up and gave it another go. And I made sure that everyone knew, do not stand in the fire. People still ended up getting clattered, but we were luckily able to finish him off this time. So I picked up the letter from Vazrudin's corpse and rushed my way back over to Honor Hold, where I claimed our brand new gloves and picked up another quest that would this time take us to the dungeon Blood Furnace. But first, I really wanted those legs, so I decided to give it one last attempt. I told myself if they didn't drop this time, I would simply move on. So we get to Zangarmarsh and DPS him down just like all the other runs. And there they were, and we were rolling against the other shaman here. But very luckily, we won the roll. Winning those legs was absolutely massive. It almost rivals the trinket for our biggest upgrade yet. So like I said, the plan now was for us to head into the Blood Furnace to get the quest completion. But first, I decided to take a trip back to Stormwind to visit my class trainer, because we are now level 62 and could learn the single most important ability for us, Steady Shot. In TBC Classic, the entire rotation for Hunter revolves around spamming Steady Shot whilst not interrupting your auto shot attacks. Of course, at the time, I didn't realise that though, and my rotation was press Steady Shot as fast as humanly possible whilst also weaving in aimed shots here and there. Obviously, looking back on it now that I do know what the rotation is, I can't help but wonder what my thought process was, or if there was even any thought behind it at all. So Blood Furnace. This dungeon was also one that I thoroughly enjoyed doing. As for the loot, there is a couple of solid pieces for us. Firstly, the Mantle of the Dusk Dweller, and the Vest of Vengeance. So both of these pieces of gear were certainly upgrades. However, I had managed to pick us up some pretty solid stuff during questing. So if it dropped, awesome. If not, then oh well. But the one thing that I hadn't managed to get a solid replacement for was my weapon. And luckily, the second boss of this dungeon, Brogak, does drop the Legion Blunderbuss. It's super slow, has great DPS, and very solid stats stapled to it. Of course though, we managed to get Brogak down, and there was no gun to be seen, just these healing gloves, which the shaman seemed to be happy about, so congrats to him. The rest of the dungeon went pretty smoothly, no issues with the trash packs at all. On to the final boss now was Caladan the Breaker. Now, something really cool that a viewer pointed out in one of the Druid videos that I had completely missed is that if you look through the floor underneath Caladan the Breaker, you actually see Magtheridon. I mean, that is so cool. This is insane foreshadowing, especially since this is one of the first dungeons players go through. I can't imagine the reaction some players had back in the day. As for the loot, of course, neither the shoulders or the chest dropped, and instead it was this two-handed stamina axe. But again, I rushed back over to Honor Hold and handed my quests in, and claimed us the perfectly balanced cloak. But of course, the idea of a brand new weapon was still floating around in my mind, so I decided to head back in for another run. And at the time, we still had a ton of stuff left to do in Hellfire, and I didn't want to spend all of my time drooling over a single piece of gear. So I told myself, this was the last run, and if it didn't drop now, I would simply move on. I mean, that worked the first time, right? But no. We ended up getting these stupid Resto Druid legs. And just because I know some of you will be curious, Caladan again didn't drop any of the loot that we needed. So now that we had done a couple of dungeon runs, it was time to get back to the questing. But now we had done pretty much all of the Honor Hold quests, so I started making my way over to the western side of the zone to a place called the Temple of Telhamat, which is just like a second Alliance settlement. And here I of course grabbed the small chunk of available quests, and I remembered to actually grab the flight point. For our first of the western quests, we had to go back over to the pools of Agona, yet again to kill terror fiends. And yes, I wish I had known that there was two quests that wanted me to kill these things, because it would have been nice to do them at the same time. The only difference this time was that we also had to kill the slimes that were here. And given how annoying they were the first time around, I would happily wipe them from existence. I then moved down south to kill some of the ugliest mobs I've ever seen. They're like a cross between a monkey and the Pokemon Scyther. I mean, it's not quite on bird people level, but it's definitely up there. There was also a decent amount of ore in this area too, which is never a complaint because I am horrendously poor. We also had to kill Black Talon the Savage for an elite quest, which was much tougher than I had originally expected. The priest I was with got completely evaporated. But once monkey things were all dead, I moved even more south to the ruins of Shanar, where these demons have enslaved some Draenei. Nothing too complicated, they worked exactly like the slaves in slave pens. Once we had killed the demon, the Draenei then became friendly. And whilst we were here, I was also able to get started on a small quest chain given by the NPC Naladu, who talks about how anywhere you find a tribe of enslaved broken Draenei, you will find a traitor who sold his brothers for the promise of power. So we retrieve the Shinar key and we then use it to free the tribe's elders. I then handed the quest in and began the next, which wanted us to use the tribe's staff to weaken the demon's Azreth. And very interestingly, the demon then shouts about how Naladu was the one who sold out his tribe. The one thing I love about this game is that even though this is a small storyline in amongst thousands of others, it still makes you invested in it. Though admittedly I am quite bad for skipping dialogue in games, but recently I have actually been reading some of the quests, and every time I do, I seem to really enjoy it. So with that little quest line out of the way, I went back to killing Hellboars for like the 8th time, and turning that quest in, that got us to level 63. So after hitting level 63, I actually then went and took a little break to do some heroics on the druid. But coming back, I wasted no time and got to work finishing off the last few quests in Hellfire, which was almost entirely elite quests. And first off was killing these big raging colossus guys. But that's when it happened. We were peacefully minding our own business, just killing our mobs, and out of literally nowhere, a fell reaver phased into existence and stomped both me and the druid into a pile of mush. Man, I had done so well so far to avoid the fell reaver, but I guess it just has to happen to everyone at least once, right? I then returned to the temple and handed all of my quests in. And very stupidly, I then purchased myself a portal all the way back to Stormwind and paid a visit to my class trainer, because I thought I was able to get myself the kill command ability. But turns out, we don't get that until level 66. So imagine my disappointment when all I was able to get was a new Raptor Strike rank and a volley spell, I guess. So feeling a bit down, I went back to Hellfire Peninsula, and my mood was quickly changed by the fact that we are now on the final few quests for this zone, which wanted us to go back over to the ruins of Shinar, this time to collect little Shinar relics. Now don't get me wrong, I've really enjoyed the TBC questing so far. There's definitely a good variety of quests, but after spending multiple days questing here, you're constantly reminded that Zangarmarsh is right there. So after collecting the Shinar relics and slaying the demon Agonis, we were on to the final quest in Hellfire Peninsula, which was an elite quest, where we had to use this item on this big crystal. But Pathalion the Calculator, who is the final boss from Mechanor, emerges from the ground and starts yapping about how he's going to drop these crystals everywhere, or something like that anyway. And then he pisses off and leaves behind Goliathan, who we've then of course got to kill. I then rush back to the Temple of Telhamat, and we had officially completed Hellfire Peninsula. Well, mostly. There was still a couple of loose quests lying around, but knowing that Zangarmarsh is literally like 100 feet from us, I just couldn't wait to quest there. Zangarmarsh, truly the peak of zone design in World of Warcraft. The first thing I did here was of course set my Hearthstone, stocked up on arrows, and grabbed all of the available quests in the area. I then began running up towards Tel'Rador. This zone is just so beautiful. This easily takes second place for the most aesthetically pleasing, behind Nagrand, of course. Now I'm not entirely sure why, but when I got to the elevator to get up to Tel'Rador, I actually ended up just doing a 180 and went right back to where I came from and got stuck into our first quest, which was actually an elite quest where we have to kill Boglash. It's kinda crazy just how powerful hunters are for solo content in this expansion. I mean, I only just managed to solo this quest on my druid, who was wearing full base vanilla gear. But on the hunter, literally zero issues. I came out of it with barely even a scratch. Gerald didn't though. And since it was right next to us, I decided to get to work on the Umbrafen murder quest. Now last time we were here, I remember I said that these guys were like Draenei before they became Draenei. Well, according to you guys, I got it completely backwards. And these are actually Draenei that have been corrupted by the fell energy, but are still barely holding on to their connection to the light. Pretty cool stuff. Once that was done, I began slowly making my way around the lake to kill the Naga. Now lucky for me, it was very late at night, like 1 AM, so I was pretty much uninterrupted. That was until I was on to trying to solo yet another elite kill quest. Now I'm still not sure exactly what I did wrong during the fight, but Gerald ended up dying and I had to feign death and reset the fight. But by the time I had managed to top off my health and mana, there was a couple of horde players. No big deal, I thought I could just let them finish and I'll try again once the mob respawns, until a bear had just manifested itself into existence and absolutely mauled them both to death. So of course, we then teamed up together and were able to take the mini boss down without any real issue at all. I then returned to Cenarian Refuge and handed the small chunk of quests in. For our second round of quests, I immediately went south and into the Fungor Cavern, where we were able to kill 10 marsh dredgers and 10 marsh lurkers. Nothing massively interesting. I was luckily able to find myself a rogue to team up with, and we were able to smash our way through it. I then returned to Cenarian Refuge and handed it in, and finally started moving up towards Telvador. And to be honest, I think doing it one location at a time was much better. It felt way more organized, even if it was a little bit slower. I also decided to set my Hearthstone here instead, since we weren't going to be going back to Cenarian Refuge for a while. For our first of the Telvador quests, I wasted no time and immediately went to the very northeast to the Dead Mire. We didn't actually have any quests here, but I remembered from last time that there was a quest item that we could pick up, so I decided to just get that out of the way. I then went and did a bit of a weird one, where we were transformed into a crow and flown around Zangarmarsh for a bit. Don't really know why, and that's probably because I didn't read the quest. But that was kinda it. The next hour and a bit worth of quests were all very simple, which is great because I was able to just chill out for a while and enjoy the beautiful but slightly weird atmosphere that Zangarmarsh offers. I killed some hydras, did the weird lake controls quest, ran inside of this building for some reason, did all of the Dreadmire quests, and even went and did the stupid underwater electric eel quest, even though I was extremely tempted to skip it, until it got to a point where our quest log was pretty much all green and ready to turn in, and at this point we were nowhere even close to being finished with this zone. And whilst I was really enjoying it, I just had a bit of an itch to head in for a little dungeon run, and what better dungeon to do than the slave pens. So going into this run, I was very excited. You may notice I have acquired myself a lovely new weak aura, showing all of my important cooldowns, my mana, and a swing timer. And the reason I was excited was because I had just taken like 2 hours to research how to actually play a hunter. And yeah, I was way off. Turns out it is way more complex than I could have ever imagined. The entire rotation revolves around timing. Our goal should be to never interrupt our auto attacks, and we've got to weave in steady shots, multi-shots, and arcane shots. And once we hit level 66, also kill command. And then at the very highest level of hunter parsing, we can even weave in melee attacks. But that's an entirely separate rant. For now, I just really wanted to learn the basic ranged rotation, also known as turreting. Honestly, I couldn't have came up with a better name for it than that. So, the slave pens. This one is actually one of my favourite dungeons in TBC. The aesthetic isn't really my thing, but the flow of this dungeon is just fantastic. There's a great mix of mob types. There's some really big AoE pools, some small hard-hitting pools, plus every boss is completely unique. You've got Menu the Betrayer, who is literally just a shaman, but my favourite is Rockmar. I mean, who doesn't love a 3-story tall lobster thing? Now in terms of the loot from here, there actually isn't that many things. However, there is one very huge item, and that is the Scorpid Sting Mantle. 21 agility, 30 attack power, some MP5, and 2 gem slots. I mean, come on. These things are way too powerful to not have. They would easily last us all the way until level 70. So we get to the end of the dungeon and free this guy from his little jail cell, and move on to the final boss, Quagmirin. Gotta say though, it was quite nice to actually clear the dungeon properly, because doing this it's on heroic difficulty, people pretty much always do skip runs, which means we really only kill like 2 mobs plus the bosses. But anyway, we get Quagmirin down and the shoulders do actually drop. But of course, this group consisted of 3 hunters, so I selected Need, and very luckily we were able to win them by only rolling 1 higher. Genuinely couldn't be happier. And sure, my goal for this video was to reach level 64, but after such a good run of the slave pens, I think it's best that we end it on a good note. I hope you all enjoyed today's video because I enjoyed making it. Genuinely, I'm really enjoying Hunter. Not quite as much as Feral Druid, but it's definitely up there. One thing that is a must for me when it comes to classes in Classic is always having something to press, rather than it just being an auto attack fest. And Hunter definitely has that. It's a surprisingly fast-paced spec with a lot of timing stuff to pay attention to. So 100%, I think I have found my alt for the foreseeable future. As for content, the next video might end up being another Druid video. Either that or I'll just get straight to work on the second Hunter video. I've also now got enough to make a TBC movie style video for the Druid. So if you guys want to see that, then let me know and I will get it done. Anyway, I think that is enough yapping for today. I hope you all have a wonderful rest of your day, and I will see you all later.